Okay, lots of stuff I want to address today, so it's almost 2 o'clock. In any case, we will go over the exam in a little more detail on Monday, because I kind of want to talk more about Hegel today, and we'll have more time on Monday, and I'll look at the results a little bit closer. But just again to mention, because I got messages from some students, especially not even from your section, guys, because you typically attend these sessions and you know this stuff a little bit better, but since I upload the videos later for 4 other sections I teach, which is 120 people, apparently many of them do not watch it. And I know they do not watch it also very well because I actually can see the statistics, right? Typically, when I upload a new video, about 20 people watch it, and the average time is between 1 to 5 minutes. That, of course, is not much, and I cannot repeat it enough, but this is a required part for all sections, including the fully online sections. The only difference with online sections, they don't have to attend the live sessions at this particular time as you guys do, but they do have to watch the videos. And if they don't watch the videos, they are not ready for the exams, because exams are based on these lectures. They are not based on the book. They overlap with the book. A lot of stuff in the book is essentially the same, and you can probably find most of it in the book too. However, there may be questions which are not in the book at all, and you will not even find it in the book. On the other hand, there may be some stuff which is in the book but not in the exam. Quite a lot of stuff. So it's not really one-to-one. Homeworks are closely connected to the book. The exams are not. So you should watch these videos. You guys should attend it. And those of you who actually in the other classes, they have more flexibility. They can do it anytime they want. They can watch them right away when I upload them, next day, 3 days later. It's up to them. But at some point, they do have to watch it too. So at this time, I'm telling it for their benefit more than for your benefit, although it applies to you guys too, because you have to either attend it, which is the best, between 2 and 3:20 p.m. on Monday and Wednesday, or watch it later, which is also possible, right? So you have kind of somewhat of a better situation in that sense. It's best to attend it. Why? Because it gives you more discipline. When you actually attend it, you are present while I'm present, you can interact, and it also is always easier if you know, okay, on these days I have to do this, rather than, when you are thinking, yeah, I can do it anytime. Very often that ends up being never done, because if you can do it anytime, you are actually doing it in no time. In other words, you don't do it at all. So that's why it's a better idea to actually attend live session rather than try to watch it later. But if you can't, that's okay too. If something happens, if you don't have time, you can just watch the video later. But you have to do either this or that. Either attend live session or watch the video. You cannot completely ignore it. That is not an option. It's a part of the course. You have to do it. Okay, so now we can get to Hegel, and note that I hope you got my messages. And that's another thing. You have to read the messages. Again, I get a lot of questions from people about the stuff I have already explained in those messages I send you. And I send them to you for a good reason, because it's important. Note that I'm not talking there about nice weather. I'm talking about things related to class. So if I send you a message, you have to make sure you get this message, you have to read this message, and if you don't understand something, you have to message me back and ask me, hey, I don't understand. You are saying this. What does it mean? But what you cannot do is ignore it and just not read it or not understand it and just go, whatever. Because that can come back in the end, and you will get a lower grade because of this. There is important stuff there. You have to pay attention. Okay. Because many students send me messages asking me, so the exam is on the 5th of April? Well, yeah, I've been talking about it in previous messages for about a month now. I mentioned it many times during the lectures. As late as last Friday, I sent a message specifically saying, hey guys, remember, there's an exam coming up on April 5th. And a couple of days later, I get messages asking me, so when is the exam? Okay, that's the only way I can communicate to you guys, either through messages or through these live sessions. There's really no other way. I cannot send you some sort of mental direct communication through psychic means. So if you don't read it and if you don't watch it, obviously you wouldn't know. Anyway, so yes, we are skipping Mill for the purposes of the lectures, partly because I don't think Mill really comes very naturally after Kant. In fact, Mill and utilitarianism is one of those parts of philosophy which don't really have much to do with Kant, even though they are following Kant in terms of time. They are in the beginning of end of 18th, beginning of 19th century, but they don't really connect to Kant very well. And also they are, I think, kind of a little bit simplistic. There's really not that much to talk about. If you read the chapter, you will understand it very well. The idea is to maximize the happiness of everybody. Bentham was thinking that can be done by a very simple means, because happiness is happiness. So if people think they're happy, they must be happy. Let's just add it up, make everybody as happy as we can. Mill has adjusted it a little bit, saying, well, there are different quality of happiness. There's different quality of pleasure. We can enjoy certain things which are not of a high quality. Example probably being food. And we can enjoy certain things which are of a different quality, such as art, theater performances, so on, books. So this is not compatible. They are really cannot be maximized in simplistic way. So that's their basic difference. But the idea is still to maximize our pleasure, to maximize the happiness of all people, and there's really not very much to go into detail. Hegel is a lot more interesting, and the book mentions him very briefly, but I do want to talk about Hegel a lot more, partly because Hegel is very unique, very special. He is closely connected to Kant because he actually builds on Kant. He starts with Kant and then goes much further. He is very interesting as a philosopher, and I also happen to specialize on Hegel. My thesis was on Hegel, so actually I know Hegel a lot better than many other philosophers. So hopefully you will see how unique and interesting Hegel is. For this reason we will start with Hegel, but first we have to again go back a little bit to Kant. Hopefully you understood Kant, but if not, that's why I still have him on that board. Let's just refresh a few things from before the exam. So what was Kant's thing in itself? What is a thing in itself? What does it mean? Independent of the observer, yeah, I guess that's one way to put it. So, in other words, thing in itself is the object how we can say God could see it, not one of us. Why not? Well, because remember, according to Kant, we actually do distort objects or change them while we are observing them. The very process of us observing this object, sensing them in some way, creates a particular distortion because of the instrument we're using in order to know the reality. What is the instrument we're using in order to know the reality? How do we know there's reality around us? Well, no, according to Kant we actually kind of do, but it's not absolutely flawless. Let's put it this way. So Kant was trying to actually investigate that very question. What is this instrument and how does this instrument work? And the instrument is what? You have to remember that the important difference between Kant and Berkeley in particular is that Berkeley was saying there's really no reality in itself. All we have is the ideas about this reality which are given us by God directly into our mind. So essentially there's just this mind somewhere, nowhere really in terms of space, because there's no space. And that mind receives these ideas from God. Now, the important difference with Kant actually say, no, there is reality. It's out there. That is the thing in itself. But we don't have direct access to it. We have access which has been distorted in a way by our instrument of access in reality. And obviously one of the part of it, not the whole thing, but a part of it would be our senses. Because how do you know there's reality? Well, you hear them, that's your ears. You see them, that's your eyes. You smell them, that's your nose. But before all of this is actually processed by your mind, there is additional work going on all that. You actually have to process it. And this is when your reason kicks in, right? And that actually plays an important part in order to process all that. Your understanding first uses the conceptualization. You are putting it into certain clusters. A cluster of experiences would constitute a pen. What is this cluster of experiences? Well, visual, you see a particular shape, then you sense it. Your fingers can sense it, right? And if you hear it, you can hear the noise. That's your ears also telling. All of this you are associating with one particular object, which you call a pen, but note that that object is essentially a creation of your mind, because your mind puts all these things together. Now, whether or not there is some such thing as the pen in some sort of outside reality, we can never know, because in order to do that, we would have to go outside our mind and not use our mind and not use our senses and access this pen somehow through magic or I don't know what. And Kant is saying that is impossible, and because it is impossible, we can never know the thing in itself. That is basically his explanation. Another important part there is antinomies. Remember, he was talking about antinomies. What were they? Yes, exactly. This is the contradictions. Remember, he was talking about 4 antinomies of pure reason. The antinomies are everything is made of the smallest particles. The other one is everything is not made of the smallest particle. There is God, there is no God. Universe has particular boundary, universe does not have a particular boundary. It's boundless, it's infinite. It's not limited by space and time. This is antinomies because they contradict each other. But remember that Kant was saying both of them kind of make sense for us. If you start thinking about it, it makes sense that everything is made of the smallest particles. But it also makes sense that it cannot be made of the smallest particles. Both of these can be argued very well, and some philosophers did argue it very well, even though they completely contradict each other. That's what the antinomies are. He found 4 of them, and if you go back to the last lecture, you will see which ones. So those were the antinomies. Now, phenomena, that actually is related to thing in itself, and the thing as we perceive it. The world as we perceive it is phenomenal world, and the world as it is in itself is nominal world. But that's not the antinomy. Okay, what was categorical imperative? That's another thing we have to remember from Kant. Yes, exactly. Moral obligations. How do you know what is moral? How do you know what is right and what is wrong? And he was saying, well, just follow the categorical imperative, which is what? Okay. Well, it's fairly simple thing, and I was hoping you would remember it, but I guess you don't. So the categorical imperative, the way Kant was phrasing it, is everything you do, just think of it as the universal law. Do you want it to be a universal law? For example, he was saying, suppose you want to borrow money and never give it back. Well, ask yourself, do I want it to be a universal law? Do you want everybody to do that? And if the answer is yes, I have no problem with that, then go ahead. But if the answer is no, I want to do it myself, but I don't want other people to do it, then the answer is no, don't do it. You can't do it. That's the categorical imperative. Again, it is fairly simple according to Kant. And according to Kant, using just reason itself, we can actually figure out what is moral and what is not. Just ask yourself this question every single time you want to do something. Now, this is all important because if you want to understand Hegel, then you have to understand Kant first, because Hegel actually, like I said, responds to all these things, and he disagrees with Kant on pretty much all of them. So that actually is what is important about Hegel. Okay. This is Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a German guy, as you can immediately guess by his name. Just like Kant, he is the next generation of philosophers, born 1770. Note that Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, the first edition, 1781. 11 years later, Hegel was only 11 years old. And then second edition, 1787. At that point, Hegel was 17 years old. So he kind of grew into that atmosphere where Kant's work was already considered classic. It was studied at universities, and some people obviously still disagreed with Kant's ideas, but pretty much everybody who, any educated person at that time, knew about them and responded to them in some way, either by agreeing or disagreeing. Few facts of his life. So he was born in Stuttgart in southern Germany. He actually was from a rather poor family, took advantage of the state-sponsored education, and at the time you could get free education, but only in particular area, and in this case it was theology, to become a priest, in other words. The state would sponsor you if you wanted to become a priest. The state would not sponsor you if you wanted to be a philosopher or, I don't know, whatever other profession. But if you wanted to become a priest, that was okay. For this reason, he actually went through this theological education, first in seminary and then University of Tübingen, and got what is more or less equivalent of PhD today, but nonetheless it was theology. In the same time, he of course did study philosophy as part of that, because it's a big part of that. That explains a little bit about him, but not everything. Now, after the university, he actually for many years kind of struggled. For a while, he was a private tutor. Then his childhood friend, Schelling, became, I think, a chair of philosophy at the University of Jena, and helped him out, kind of invited him over. So he started giving private lectures at the University of Jena. He was not a professor on the staff of the university. He was just allowed to teach there privately for a few years. Then Schelling left this university, so he again kind of struggled. For many years he was not well known in philosophy. In 1807 he published his first work. Well, it's not really first work, it's the first major work. It's the first truly unique work, which is today considered one of the biggest, most interesting works in the whole history of philosophy, Phenomenology of Spirit. Notoriously difficult book. It's very difficult to read it, it's very difficult to understand it, but trust me, it's one of the most profound books, and if you actually do read it and actually do understand it, lots of things become more clear in this world and the way it works. But the language there, like I said, is excruciatingly hard, and I wouldn't recommend it without some sort of preparation. Anyway, for this reason, partly, it wasn't very well understood by the readers at the time too. So he did not get much success with it. Not until much later. He followed it up with Science of Logic, his other major work, and after Science of Logic became well read, he finally started gaining some recognition. he was invited as a professor of philosophy at the University of Heidelberg first in 1816. Note that at that point he was 46 years old already. That's just when he started getting some recognition. Happens all the time, by the way. Many philosophers in the 19th century, when we'll talk about, some of them didn't get any recognition during their lifetime. Some of them got some recognition towards the end of their life. Hegel is relatively lucky because he was 46 when he got some recognition. So not that late in life. Still a bunch of years left. Now, after that, he actually was invited to Berlin, University of Berlin, and starting from 1818 at the University of Berlin, he became, you may say, a legend. That was a complete triumph. Partly because of his students. His students adored him. His students loved his lectures. They were moved by them. They actually, after his death, they published their conspects as separate books explaining his ideas, and a lot of it followed up. And when we talk about Marx next week, to understand Marx, you absolutely have to understand Hegel, and you have to understand that Marx actually was impressed by Hegel and started building his ideas on Hegel's ideas. Okay, he was very happily lecturing there until 1831, when he very, very suddenly died during this cholera epidemic. That was a little bit like COVID now. It hit Berlin very suddenly. Lots of people died rather quickly from cholera, and unfortunately Hegel was one of them. Within a very short period of time he got sick and almost immediately died. If it wasn't for cholera, he probably could live another 20 years or something, write a lot more. We will never know how that would have turned up, but well, he wasn't very young. He was 61 years old at that time, right? So that was already, I guess, peak of his career. But nonetheless. Okay, now let's look at his ideas. And before we go through the slides, I want to actually go back to the board and explain a little bit of that on the board, because this is kind of important to understand. So remember, this is Kant. This is what we left on the board last time. I did not erase it yet, so you can see it's still there. Again, briefly, to understand Kant and to understand his idea, this is our mind, this is the things, pretty much anything, be it a marker, a table, whatever else, whatever we have in reality, the world in which we call real. And remember, again, what Kant is saying is that there is a two-way process here. It's not just that our senses perceive some sort of feed, which he calls material matter of experience. Now that matter is then shaped by our mind. Our mind has a role to play there too. It's like glasses. You can compare it to glasses. Suppose without glasses you can't see anything. Then you put on glasses, you see things. So that's what these forms do. First of all, time and space. This is like these glasses our mind has to put on in order to perceive reality. But in the same time, they are inevitably distort reality, according to Kant. Because reality as it is in itself then becomes inaccessible to us. Our mind does all this work. And after our mind does all this work, introduces space, time, all these categories, it inevitably puts itself into the reality in a sense, and reality is no longer pure. It's no longer the way it is without the work of our mind. He also makes this distinction between noumena and phenomena. Again, and phenomena would be phenomenal world as science tells us it is. Now, that world has causality. Everything in phenomenal world is caused by another thing. So that's what science does, right? What does science do? It figures out what are the causes of another thing. Experimental method. You put an experiment and you figure out, if I do this, what happens? This happens. Okay, so that must have caused this. So if I want that effect, I do this. Note that this is, again, what we're doing today with the virus, right? We figured out what causes our disease, COVID. That's the virus. And then what can we do to stop that from happening? Vaccination. And the science figured out the way to introduce this, well, let's call it stuff, into our system, and then our system will adjust itself and will be able to fight the virus off before it takes over. But that is based on this principle of causality. One thing causes the other. Now, is there such thing as freedom then? For example, am I determined to continue with this lecture? Or can I just say, oh, to hell with it, turn off the computer and go play video game? Now, we kind of know that, yes, we have freedom. But how do we know that? Because if you look at this world of causality, everything is causally determined. It doesn't seem like there's any room for freedom. It seems like one thing follows the other according to these rules. So, Kant's answer is there is freedom, but it is in this nominal world. And again, that is one of the antinomies too, in that sense. So that freedom and no freedom are both true in the same time, because freedom is true in nominal world, freedom is not true in phenomenal world. In phenomenal world, in the world of science, nothing happens for no reason. But in nominal world, we actually have freedom. We can decide whether to continue with the lecture or not. We can decide anything we want, and nothing determines us. So this is how Kant saw this. Now, what was Hegel's criticism? First of all, he actually had a problem with this thing in itself. He criticized Kant by saying, wait a minute, what exactly does that mean? Dividing the world into thing and thing in itself. Why even talk about thing in itself if you can't access it? It seems like an invention in a sense. So he actually does pick up on this model, and he says, yes, there is a distinction. But that distinction happens in our mind. Our mind perceives things as reality different from the way things really are in reality as part of its structure. This is actually normal, he says. Every time we access reality, we do get some sort of, you may say, distorted picture of reality. But what we actually do is our mind self-corrects itself. And so then, when you look at reality this way, let's say you think this is reality, right? Let's call it A. As we perceive it, we're thinking this is reality. Let's put a concrete example so you could understand. You're going into the forest and you're thinking there's no bear there. All the bears are gone. I can go there. So this is state of affairs A. Now what then happens if this is actual state of affairs B? There's a bear in the forest. What would happen? Well, for example, the bear can actually attack you, right? Then your mind will be forced to readjust itself to this new reality and to tell you, wait a minute, I was actually wrong. This is not how things are. So that is more or less what Hegel is saying. Hegel is saying we do in fact perceive things in a distorted way, but the mind is self-correcting. So what actually happens here is when we see things in a distorted way and discover that they are not in fact the way we think it is, our mind brings us closer to reality, to another, well, let's say, state of affairs A star or something. Now that's closer to the actual reality. Then our mind can again encounter a problem and readjust it to a double star. Then our mind again encounters a problem and again recorrects itself, moving closer and closer and closer to this reality. This is what he calls dialectic, the dialectical process. Okay, let's now erase all that and talk a little bit in more detail about it, so hopefully you guys would understand. Okay, let me see here with the slides. Okay, Phenomenology of Spirit. The first idea there is this. Our mind has this tendency to think of things in a one-sided way, taking one side only. Things are either one or many. We are either free or determined, necessitated. There's either a thing or a thing in itself. Now that kind of what is known as dichotomy, Hegel saying, is wrong approach, because things are never really either this or that. And you can also see this problem today, again, in society and in politics. People do tend to think in these kind of distinctions. The most simple distinction, if you look, for example, at American politics, would be what? Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. Now that's a simplification. And if you look at any one person, he typically is neither really liberal or conservative. He is kind of both, and he is also kind of neither. He may have tendency towards one of them, but that doesn't necessarily mean he is definitely fits that particular simplistic narrative. So things are never that simple. That's what Hegel is saying. They typically are both. So when our mind does that, it is just the way for our mind to simplify things. But in reality, all the ideas develop in a different way. The ideas develop in this way, which kind of similar to what I just talked to you about. Every time you have an idea, let's say of something A, something comes and interrupts that and then tells you this is not the case. So another idea, let's call it B, actually throws you off. Now then your mind actually readjusts and hopefully reaches some sort of compromise, synthesis, which is the third stage, and that then can be then called combination of A and B. This is dialectic in a very simple, simplistic way. It's more complicated than Hegel, but the idea is often described as thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So every time there's an idea, there's another idea which contradicts it. So suppose the idea is we are free. We can choose whatever we want. Now what idea immediately contradicts that? Wait a minute. If we are free, how come I can't do this even if I want that? So then the other idea which comes here is the idea I'm determined. I have to follow these determined laws of reality. I can't do whatever I want. I don't have any freedom. Now note that neither of them is actually true. The truth is, It is indeed both. In some things you are free, in some things you are determined. It's a combination. It's not as simple as just either I'm free, in which case I'm completely free, or I'm completely determined and then I have no freedom at all. So that is a good example of what he calls dialectic. And he says anything we do, the ideas in our head, every time follow this pattern. This is the normal pattern of reality. Now, his criticism of Kant, first of all, is why do we even have to look for this, whether or not we perceive reality correctly in terms of the instrument, in terms of reason or whatever else. He's saying you don't really need to look at that at all, because investigation of reality is a self-correcting process. Once you do not perceive something correctly, the reality itself will correct you. So it will kind of force you to understand that you've been getting it right. So dialectic, remember, comes from a Greek word, and this is what essentially started with Socrates, this question and answer type of conversation. What is similar here? That the idea is the same. Remember, Socrates was saying that he doesn't actually know anything, so there's no correct answer. He was just asking these questions. But as long as you ask these questions, what you find out is that simplistic position you're taking is never the correct one. And it literally is never the correct one. Because anytime you take this simplistic position, somebody can ask you this additional question and you will discover that you actually are wrong, that you can't just put it in this way, which is exactly what Socrates was doing. But that's okay, because that is the process of thinking as we know it. This is how our ideas develop. You take a provisional idea A, just because you have to take a particular stand, right? You have to have a particular position. But every time you do that, there is an idea B will come up which will contradict that. And hopefully, if you are able to move on, you will understand that neither A or B are true, but some sort of a synthesis of both. And then you will get synthesis, which we can call C. But that synthesis is not the end of the story, is it? Then there is another idea, let's call it X or something, will come up, which will contradict your synthesis. And then you will come up with a new synthesis. And that synthesis in turn will be contradicted by something else. This is normal. This is never-ending process. However, this is not a pointless process. It's a process of improvement. We constantly improve on our understanding of reality. We constantly move towards this one true reality, which we can probably never reach. Whether or not we can reach it is actually another question. So you can think about this in kind of this way. Let's say this true reality, which Kant was calling thing in itself, is this. This is the true reality. And you're kind of trying to hit that true reality. So you take in a position here. Now you will soon discover that your position is actually problematic. That again, there's some things contradicted. So then you will change your position and let's say go here. Note that you're kind of overshooting that reality, but you're getting closer to it. Again, reality will correct you. It will tell you this is wrong. Then you will get maybe here. Again, you will be closer, but not there yet. And that process will continue, and you'll be getting closer and closer to that reality, possibly without never even reaching it. Nonetheless, you will be improving on your understanding of reality. You will be getting better at this. Your ideas will be closer and closer to the reality. So the ideas develop through conflict and opposition. This is dialectical process. And note that this is actually one of the questions for the final. Okay, in internal dialectic, now there's a distinction between our beliefs and the objects. But this distinction is within the mind. The difference between the thing and the thing in itself is within our mind. That is important to understand. Again, this is not exactly what Berkeley was saying, but this is still type of idealism. So basically, this is one of the types of idealism. Let's just go a little bit further in order for you to understand how Hegel's idealism is different from Berkeley and Kant. Okay, now one of the things is, again, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It's a very simplistic way to look at it. Ideas, according to Hegel himself, very often have different relation to other ideas. Sometimes the idea may have a contradiction right within itself. So you don't need another idea to contradict it. The idea itself will kind of fall apart. Sometimes it may just be incomplete. It's kind of correct, but it needs some other elements. Sometimes two ideas can completely oppose some sort of third idea. By themselves they may be okay, but the third idea is what is problematic. So that actually is kind of a rather complex process. Nonetheless, that is a process. So what is this true reality? What is in the middle, this line in the middle? Hegel calls it the concept, or der Begriff in German. It does have a lot of similarity to something we already heard at the beginning of the class, and this is this Greek word logos. Remember logos? Remember logos typically is translated as the word, and indeed our words is what our thoughts are made of, and this is what kind of this reality we're talking about all the time is made of. So there is a close connection between his idea of a concept and the Greek idea of logos, as we have encountered it at the beginning of class. Now, that would be the truth. Rather obviously, because remember, again, if we go back here, if you, again, look at yourself taking a particular position about reality, and then that position being not good, but this is better, what's right here in the middle? The truth is right here. That's the truth. And also, that is God, because God is the truth. So that is essentially what Hegel says we're all striving for. Now, one interesting thought experiment we can perform in order to understand this, how does this connect to his idea of freedom, is this. And I do like to give students this example because it's very, very striking for many of them. Okay, so let's talk about freedom now. Let's talk about freedom. Let's see if we have the three doors we can walk into. Let's call them A, B, and C. I don't know, did we do that? So you can pick any one of them. Which one would you pick? B. Why? Right, you can pick B, but I mean, there's really honestly no difference between you picking B and you picking A or you picking C, because you simply don't know what's behind these doors, right? But that's the whole problem. Now, until you know what's behind the doors, you have freedom. You can pick any one of them, but that freedom doesn't mean anything. In fact, it's not even a freedom. In fact, many of us, when we face these kind of choices, end up flipping a coin. What does that mean when we flip a coin? That essentially means that we're giving up our freedom to the coin. We want the coin to decide for us. Once you flip a coin and coin falls, say, heads, and you decide that if heads, I'm picking the door A, then you no longer have any freedom, right? The coin told you to pick A, and you do. So you give up your freedom. Now, suppose you find out that behind this door you will be happy. Some sort of happiness. I don't know. Whatever you think your happiness is. Lots of money. Behind this door, you will be robbed. And behind this door, you will be killed. Now, which door would you pick now? Yeah, sometimes students just, for fun are saying something else, like B. I actually like to be robbed. But obviously, if you seriously think about it, you will obviously say, oh, if it's a real choice, I'll pick A. Why would I never pick the other two? I have to be stupid to pick the other two. What happened? You actually don't have any choice now, do you? Your choice is gone. Now you have to pick A, because that's the only one that fits for you. So, how come? You got some information and you lost your freedom. But that actually what Hegel says is when you truly have freedom. That is the moment when you have real positive freedom. The positive freedom is not to be able to pick any door. The positive freedom is to know which door to pick. Once you know which door to pick, you no longer have any choice. Because why would you choose the other two? But you have freedom. So that is Hegel's idea of freedom. And again, he's saying essentially that's the same thing here. This is your door A. Or rather, no, that wouldn't be A. This is your door A. This is your door B. This is your door C or whatever. So you actually, if you know things as they really are, you will have no choices. You will know exactly what to do. The problem we have is we actually don't. We don't know what is the right choices in life. We have too many choices. We are lost. We're trying to figure it out. How do you figure it out? Trial and error. You do something, it hurts you, you start thinking, hey, maybe that was not such a good idea. Maybe next time I shouldn't do that. And that is, again, how he sees freedom. And then this is where you can kind of remember another part of the Bible here, which has this very striking saying, you will know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. If you guys know Bible, that's in the Bible. You will know the truth, and this truth shall make you free. So that is what Hegel's saying that means. Once you know that truth, that this is the correct door for you, this is when you have the freedom. The true freedom is to know the correct choice. The true freedom is not to have all the choices. Because if you have all the choices, you have no freedom. You actually are lost, confused. It becomes matter of chance. And matter of chance, matter of caprice, that's not freedom. Okay. So we all kind of striving to find this one correct door in life. And that is, you may also call it the concept or logos. So what is Hegel's idealism? Hegel pictures the world as being this dynamic spiritual force, which is in its process of development. This is like if you look at the history of the world from the beginning to our time, this is what you would kind of see. If you take this overall picture. So at some point there was just nothing. Big Bang happened, right? Then the world started developing. At some point our planet appeared. At some point life appeared on our planet. At some point that life developed into some humans. Then humans slowly learned to communicate to each other. Then humans continued to evolve. So you see something's actually developing here. Something is moving towards something. So what's moving towards what? Absolute idea or absolute spirit. That is what is being developing. This is like everything. And we are part of it. We're not the whole of it though. And that's what his absolute idealism is. Absolute is something completely self-contained. That is that major force which is being developed which has been moving in the universe. We are part of it, but we are not the only part of it. Everything is a part of it. So how can we know reality? Well, because we're part of this reality. Reality is part of us. In that sense, it is idealism, because it says that it is all part of this one absolute, including us. But there's an important difference with, say, Berkeley or Kant, because Hegel is saying that, well, for one thing, remember in Berkeley, God was giving us the ideas of reality. No, we are given the ideas of reality itself, because we are the reality. But why can't I then make up anything I want? Why can't I have the $1 million on my table right now if my mind is this force which creates reality? Well, this is why, because it doesn't do it alone. Absolute Spirit or Geist is the whole, everybody, which is larger than its part. Only everybody together creates reality, not one person. One person cannot create reality, but all the people together, that's the reality. So if all the people agree that you have $1 million on your table, then you do have $1 million on your table. And that's really the only meaningful way for you to think about it. But if other people disagree, you cannot have $1 million on your table, because for you just to have it in your mind would be meaningless. That would not create reality. So reality is created by our mind, all right, but not by mind of one person, by the entire world's mind, which again is bigger than just the sum of all people. How is it bigger than the sum of all people? Well, we sometimes can actually see that. For example, in a classroom, right? Very often when you have group projects, several people coming together come up with better ideas than each one of them separately. Every time you have a collective of people, it works better than just one person. Hopefully you guys noticed that. And that's exactly an example of that. Each person in separation can never achieve as much as all these people together. Okay, so this is a very powerful idea. Now, based on that, again, Hegel is saying, what is his historicism? Historicism is the idea that the truth of anything, any position, any idea cannot be understood apart from its origin and the role in historical setting. So there's no such thing as the truth in itself. The truth is related to where you are in that process of development of the spirit, at which point. So the truth, the way it was the truth for, say, ancient Greece, would be different from the truth as the way it was for medieval people, which in turn would be different from the truth the way it is for us, and it will also be different for people who live after us. So the truth in that sense is kind of a changing concept. It's true concept, but it's a changing concept. It has to be understood within its own time, and it's closely related to its own time. Now, in particular, if you look at history of philosophy, right, we were doing it from the beginning, and you see that its philosophers constantly contradict each other. They have all these different ideas. Now, Hegel saying that is completely normal, because their ideas reflect the where the spirit, absolute spirit, was at this particular point of time. If it was, let's say, at the point of development the way it was 400 before Christ, 400 BC, for that particular period, philosophers were really absolutely describing reality the way it was truly perceived by the society at that time. But it changed. And then in medieval times, it again was this kind of true idea which was the child of its own time. So every time you have to understand a philosopher, you have to look at what was happening, what were the surroundings, what was within politics, within science, within the whole spirit of that particular time. So it is closely connected to that. There is no probably end to this process. This is a kind of a big question about that, which many philosophers today are arguing over. Does Hegel mean that there is an end point to all that? Is there such a thing when we can reach this absolute highest point of development and then we kind of done? Or is there no such point? Well, probably the answer is there is no such point. He never says that specifically. It's kind of like asymptotic. If you guys took calculus, you know what asymptotic is, right? Asymptotic is like gets closer and closer and closer, but never really reaches it. So if this is the line and this is asymptotic, asymptotic would be getting infinitely closer to that line, but will never reach it. That's what asymptotic essentially is. Okay, so now in his moral theory, how did he criticize Kant here? Ethics, he is saying ethics actually comes from the community. How do we know what is moral, what is right to do, what is wrong to do? That is determined by the community itself. The life of the community, whatever community thinks is moral, that's what moral is. There is no moral outside of that. It is whatever that particular community at that particular point considers the most befitting for its proper function. So going back to Greece, Greek city-states, there was a lot of admiration for these Greek city-states during the early modern times. Lots of philosophers actually were reading Plato, Aristotle, and were impressed by them. Now, according to Hegel, those were indeed fantastic times. The Greek city-states had this kind of very, very well-developed ethical community because each person there essentially was happy participating in this life of the community and being part of it. And this is the most important thing for happiness. There was, however, just one big problem. While they were able to participate in life of their community very well, they were doing that without self-reflection. They did not understand why they were doing these particular things rather than some other things. Self-reflection would be just kind of stop and think, why do I do it this way rather than some other way? They just thought, well, that's part of the way world works, right? We believe in multiple gods, we sacrifice animals, we do these things, and this is all kind of normal. Remember we talked about it, like why does it start to fall apart? It started to fall apart because people started questioning that. They went to other parts of the world and they saw other people live different way. Other people believed in different gods. Other people prayed in a different way. Other people really had different customs. And so what happened then? These uncritically accepted values of their community began to deteriorate. They actually started to question that and go, well, wait a minute. If I believe multiple gods and this, say, Egyptian person believes there's just one God, the sun, maybe there's no God. Maybe none of us is right. And that kind of led to people being detached from their community because everyone started thinking, well, if no community is right, then perhaps community is never right. And why should I even believe other people? Why should I listen to people who tell me there are multiple gods? Why should I listen to people who are telling me there's one God? What actually I should do is figure it out for myself. I'm a fully developed individual. I can figure it out completely by myself. So what happens there is rise of individualism, right? Again, something which comes to a similar circle in our society. Individualism. Everybody thinks, I know better than these other people. These other people, they're all stupid. I'm the only one who actually knows how things truly are because I am this completely grown, self-determined individual who knows better than anybody else. Everyone becomes his own living truth. So the truth then is my position. If I think this is how things are, this is the truth. And there's no truth other than that. Now, there's naturally a problem there as you can probably imagine. Because, as we all find out, whatever we think, at some point we discover that may not be actually the truth. How do we discover that? Again, reality kind of contradicts that. If we believe there is no bear in the forest, we go to the forest and the bear jumps on us and kills us. Well, hopefully not kills us, but hurts us. Well, you would have to be pretty stupid at that point to say, no, I was right, there was no bear. It's just my imagination. No, you will probably accept that you are wrong, that there was a bear. And this is what happens to at least the best of us. We discover that all these positions, which we hold so dear, many of them, if not all of them, actually were kind of wrong. That we have to change our position because apparently they don't fit very well with this reality. But that leads to a lot of problems. By the way, again, going back to Socrates, let's think about this. Looking at the universal moral order, do you think Socrates was seeking universal moral order or not? And was he battling for or against individualism? So again, universal moral order and individualism would be two opposing sides, right? So if you think there is a universal moral order and there is such thing as the truth, then of course you will be contradicting this idea that I am the only source of the truth. And remember, that actually was the position of who? Universalism, you can partly say, is kind of a society. Okay, well, Louis, see, that's kind of a problem then, because you start by saying he questioned many people's ideas of their own truth, right? But in the next sentence you says that he was for individualism by forcing people to question their beliefs. Now, if you force individual people to question their beliefs, how are you for individualism? Individualism, that actually would be position of the sophists. Remember, what did Gorgias say? A man is his own truth. Man is the measure of all things. So each one of us is the measure of all things. I decide what is true for me. You decide what is true for you. Now Socrates actually goes against that and says, no, there is such thing as the truth. And it's not what is true for you or true for me. It is what is true for all of us. So that actually goes against individualism. It goes for universal values. Yeah, so that, for some reason students often think about it in this way, but yeah, that is what Socrates was trying to do. He was trying to say, no, there is such thing as the truth, there is such thing as the justice, remember? And it's not but what is just for you different from what is just for the other guy. It is what is just for all of us. That's what justice is. Okay, now alienation. We will talk about alienation next time when we get to Marx. I think I may even finish with Hegel on Monday because there's still quite a lot to cover there. But nonetheless, let's see if we can do that in 13 minutes. What is the alienation? It creates alienation. What specifically, first of all, what sense of alienation that would create? Well, if you start thinking of yourself as being your own individual apart from the society, then you will have this problem between public and private. We have similar problem right now in our society for the same reason. To the benefit of the society, you should wear a mask. But you are individual. You have your freedom. Why should you wear a mask? Do you see the problem there? And then you go to a grocery store, free independent individuals encounter other free independent individuals, and they are not very happy with you. Why not? What's the problem? What do you think? There's no problem? Well, it's not so much that they're putting you at risk, it is what you are putting them at risk, if you are the one who is without a mask, right? So often people say, well, I don't care if I get sick, but what's the answer to that? Well, you don't care if you get sick. I care if I get sick from you. So, yeah, well, it just depends on which side you, like if you are going there with a mask and the other person doesn't wear a mask, then of course that the tables are turned. And again, you can tell him, why are you not wearing a mask? And he can tell you, well, I don't want to. You can wear a mask if you want. And then what you can tell him is, wait a minute, it's a two-way street. If you are spreading the virus, even though I'm wearing a mask, I'm not as protected as if both of us are wearing the mask, right? And so when he says he doesn't care, he actually takes away your freedom, because your freedom of not being sick with the virus has been taken away. Why? Well, because it's all interrelated. What's the alienation here? Well, think about it. Do these people seem happy to you? If somebody goes to a grocery store without a mask, are they going to have a happy experience? There's plenty of videos on TikTok describing that. Yeah, that's the problem, because, you may be very, very convinced that it is your right, but it will clash with reality. It will clash with these other people. And then you will be yelling at them, telling them, or not necessarily you, but let's say this hypothetical Karen, who usually they call them on TikTok, yelling at them and saying, I have my freedom, I have my rights. And then you start wondering, like, what is the point of all of that? She's probably going to end up not being able to buy what she wanted to buy. She's probably going to ruin her entire day, ruin the entire day of this salesperson who has to encounter all that. And like, who's the winner here? Who is happy? I don't see anybody happy. Maybe it will be easier if she just wore the mask in the first place, and then everybody would be happy, right? So this is what the alienation is. This individualism makes people unhappy, and they are persistent in their unhappiness. They double down on it. They get angrier and angrier, not understanding that they are hurting themselves. So today it probably is much worse even than back in the day. And Hegel was already describing that in exactly these kind of terms. He's saying, every time you try to create this kind of individualistic ethics, you will necessarily fail, because your community together, all these people together, create these values. So if the community considers it to be necessary for you to wear a mask, then you should wear a mask, because only the community of people together can properly function in this way. So this is where he clashes with Kant about this Kantian approach, because he also says that the way Kant looks at it, he calls it morality, is detached from real situation in the world. How is it detached? Well, he's saying, where is he getting that? Let's say the example with you shall not take other people's property, right? If you want it to be the universal law, do you want it to be the universal law that nobody takes your property? And most of us would say yes. Now, Kant thought that then that means you should not steal. Why are people stealing? Why are people still stealing then? Why are they not listening to that categorical imperative? Well, they could have freedom to do so and still decided not to do it, but they somehow deciding that they should do it. Well, one way to think about it is this. Ask a person who just stole something. Does he want it to be the universal law that everybody steals? You can get two possible answers. Maybe he'll tell you, no, I just want it to be a universal law that I can steal. I don't want it to be a universal law that other people steal. So he can tell you very much without a contradiction, he wants to live in the society where only one person can steal, and that's him. Perfectly consistent position. That's what many people think about it. The other possibility is he'll tell you, yeah, actually, you know what? I think there's no problem. If other people are more clever than me, let them steal from me. But as long as I'm more clever, I'll steal from them. Right? That's another possibility. So what does it come back to? What is behind that? It's not the pure logic. It's actually these values of the community and how do we accept them or not. So more typically than not, this is again a question of upbringing. It's the question of how did this person grow up? Who were his parents? What did he see when he hang with his friends? Right? So you will immediately discover that most people who are criminals are the ones who grew up in a community where that was considered possibly even an honor. Right? He was hanging out with other people, with his friends, and his friends would probably tell him, look, my hero is this gangster. He has a gun, and he can take whatever he wants. So naturally, that community value will be his value. That's what doesn't work with Kant's imperative. Hegel says it's empty. It's not based on anything. In theory, yeah, we can agree with that. But whether or not we accept it in practice depends not on some pure reason. It depends on our personal values as we get them from the community we live in, from other people. That's the only way we can actually get these values. There's no other way. These values are not created in vacuum. So, is stealing bad can only be determined based again on this idea of whether you accept the idea of private property, whether you have no problem with people taking whatever they want from the other people, and so on. So that's not universal. That's a very, very particular problem which people themselves have to resolve. Kant can show that there is a contradiction. You cannot both believe in a rule that justifies stealing and the institution of private property. But if you don't believe in the institution of private property, for example, you will steal and you will see no problem with stealing, and vice versa. So there's no contradiction. That is absolutely consistent with reason. In fact, our reason in this sense is just a servant of, again, our desires. And this is self-denial if you do not understand that. All the values we have, in fact, are communal values. And there is really not no examples where you would kind of find the contradiction here. Even if you look at great reformers, people who seemingly go against the community, right? Jesus, Marx, Gandhi, Martin Luther King. They were not really rejecting the values of the community, they were just emphasizing the fact that the community does not live up to its own values. So, at the time of Martin Luther King, it was already abundantly clear that all people are equal, regardless of the color of their skin. However, there was still discrimination, right? So that's why Martin Luther King has risen up and said, his famous speech, I have a dream, and so on. Why? Because the community value was one thing. It was that people are all equal, that there's no discrimination based on the skin color. But the community practice did not correspond to its own value. Nonetheless, he did not get this value from outer world. That value is part of that community. That value was already there. So we do always find them within the society we live in. Now, going back to Athens, now you can actually have the type of community which Athens was striving to become, but you do actually have to do it with more self-consciousness. You have to understand what specifically is problematic and adjust it as a society as a whole, and that way to build a better society, and then you will accept it because you will say, well, that's a better way to live. Right? So there actually are such values of the community which at that point at least are the best. It's just that they have to be decided by all of us together. None of us in separation can do that. It's impossible. You cannot establish your own values. If you start thinking that stealing is good, killing is good, and so on, in going against your community, you will be punished. You will be unhappy. You will not have a happy life. The community as a whole determines this value. So even though there is no such thing as, the absolute commandments or whatever, but nonetheless, within the community, there are certainly these values which community establishes. Okay, we are running out of time, so I will have to come back to that. There's still quite a bit of interesting stuff in Hegel, which we'll talk about on Monday, and then we will proceed to Marx. Hopefully that was interesting and clear enough to you guys. It's a little difficult to explain Hegel in this way, and I'm not sure how well you understand it. But just to remind you, so again, this Sunday you do have a homework and a quiz on chapter 12, right, on Stuart Mill. We didn't talk about him, but you still should read the chapter. And for next week, please read chapter 13, which is mainly on Marx, but it also covers Hegel, and we will finish up with Hegel on Monday and then proceed to Marx and do Marx for the rest of the next week. And also I will mention the results of the exam more specifically, so just get some statistics for you, who did what, well, without naming any names, but like what are the past results and so on. But I can tell you right now, by the way, several people got 100. Several people did get 100. I know that. And several people did very badly. And everybody else is kind of in the middle. So this is the results. Okay, that's all for today. We are out of time. Hopefully we'll see you on Monday and we'll pick it up from here.